This is the future.
So today, we finally tackle Sevagoth. This guide will not include any Helminth build, and we will discuss here how you can enjoy Sevagoth to the fullest with the right mod setup. For those who are saying that Sevagoth is mediocre at best, and he is just a mastery rank fodder or worst, a trash frame, then I suggest that you take some lessons from this video. There are tons to cover in this video, so let's go ahead and proceed to know each ability of this frame first. Before we get into combos and how to properly use each of Sevagoth's ability, let us first see a descriptive view of how each ability works. To be more specific, let's tackle its purpose and maximization. To begin with, his first ability, called Reap, is basically his shadow flying around to damage enemies and apply a vulnerability buff. The ability will inflict radial damage, and the debuff works like Naz's Chakram vulnerability debuff. You can actually stir and command to which location you want the shadow to go to by simply aiming in that direction. The energy cost of this ability is affected by efficiency mods. Its damage and debuff strength are affected by power strength, while the flight of the shadow and its debuff duration are affected by duration mods. While this will not matter mostly in your build, but it's also good to know that the casting speed of this ability is affected by mods like Natural Talent and Speed Drift. I know that this ability is quite simple, but you will love this when you know how awesome it is to combo with Sevagoth's second and third ability, that in fact, you won't need any Helminth builds to make the frame great. Moving on, we got his second ability called So. Individually, this ability is an area of effect damage over time skill. The radius is affected by range mods. The damage over time is affected by strength mods, and how long the DOT lasts depends on how much duration you put in your build. This ability does combo well with Reap, mostly known as the Reap What You Sow combo. Enemies that were seeded by So will receive damage in an area of effect based on the target's remaining health when casting your Reap's shadow. And mind you, the damage over time dealt by this ability is actually true damage per second, and with you using the Reap What You Sow combo, it can create a semi-nuking combo for Sevagoth. Although it can't melt high-level enemies with high armor values, the combo does prove to be devastating against those other trash mobs. Next, we got his Gloom ability. I may sound problematic on my recent Gloom Helminth combo, since it's very hard to maintain its energy if you want your Helminth build to be effective in a specific frame. However, Gloom in the hands of Sevagoth is a different scenario. You will have no energy problems with this ability when used by this frame. I'll tell you how to maintain Gloom later, but for now, you must also know the different synergy of this ability. First and foremost, the ability does two things: slow down the movement speed of enemies and give you and your allies life steal. It is now one of the most powerful, if not, the most powerful crowd control in the game right now, boasting a maximum of 95% damage reduction at 270% power strength in your build. While this ability is active, damage dealt by Reap's shadow and So heal Sevagoth's health. Damage dealt by your shadow's consume ability further heals the shadow's health with life steal while the shadow remains in range. This ability remains activated and centered on Sevagoth's body during Exalted Shadow, and each enemy alive within Gloom's radius fills 0.1% per second of the death well for Exalted Shadow. Speaking of death well and his fourth ability Exalted Shadow, this is somehow similar to Baruch's restraint meter but with a twist. Your abilities don't just increase your death well, but instead, your death well increases once you have killed enemies affected by your abilities. Each enemy marked with your Reap ability then killed by any source, or directly killed by Reap's shadow fills 5% of the death well for Exalted Shadow. Also, each enemy seeded by your So ability then killed by any source, or directly killed by So fills 5% of the death well for Exalted Shadow. And like I've said earlier, each enemy alive within Gloom's radius fills 0.1% per second of the death well for Exalted Shadow. To make it short, you need to use your abilities, then kill those affected enemies before you can use your ultimate ability. Now, your ultimate ability will be usable once death well is full. You can cast and freely use your shadow. A very important detail that you must know about Wraithe is that Sevagoth and his shadow are a different entity. I've tried various possible combos between him and his shadow, but it looks like they don't have any synergy at all. To be more specific, the mods and arcanes you are using in Sevagoth won't affect his shadow. For example, you have Arcane Energize on Sevagoth, then it procs and you decided to use his shadow with Arcane Energize. Instead of waiting for the cooldown of the Arcane, his shadow has a separate proc for Arcane Energize. In addition, his shadow also has a different set of abilities. Embrace is like Mag's Pull, which lets you pull enemies into your shadow's location. Consume is like a copycat of Wraithe, which deals radiation damage and heals Sevagoth's shadow when dashing through an enemy. While Death Harvest is like Sevagoth's Sow ability minus the damage over time. It lets you apply damage vulnerability to enemies within a specific radius. And lastly, his shadow's fourth ability lets you reunite with Sevagoth. While it may seem confusing at first, but honestly, Sevagoth and his shadow are very easy to understand if you know the role of both of them. In my opinion, they play different roles and they work well together. Sevagoth is more like playing the support role for his shadow. With Gloom, he can provide hard crowd control and as well as lifesteal for his shadow. While his shadow is more of the assault type, he takes care of all the raw damage and kills. But then again, this doesn't mean that there's any weak spot on them, since Sevagoth can also nuke a group of enemies with the Reap What You Sow combo. While his shadow can also survive and crowd control with the help of some decent survivability stats and the Embrace ability, which is really good when it comes to pulling targets and providing a reliable CC ability for Sevagoth. Also, he got his Consume to just heal when he needs to. And the best part is, this Warframe is unkillable if you know how to use his Immortality passive. Upon death, Sevagoth turns into a tombstone and you can only use his shadow and the Consume ability. You will have a timer in the right bottom corner of your screen representing how much time you have and how many enemies you need to kill to resurrect Sevagoth. The good news is, it's not hard to pull this Immortality trick, since every time you dash into an enemy, it will always be an instant kill. Also, it only needs 5 enemies killed by Consume to resurrect Sevagoth. And once resurrected, Sevagoth will be at full shield and health and you can just rinse and repeat the process if you wanted to. However, be warned that your shadow can be damaged by enemies, so be cautious as to when your shadow dies. Sevagoth will also die. Now, the biggest challenge I can say about this Warframe is modding. Not because this Warframe is hard to understand, but because it will consume tons of former to give this Warframe a great build. You need to mod Sevagoth, his shadow, and his Exalted Claws separately. It cost me about 13 former to have all the necessary mods for this Warframe. For Sevagoth, I have this mod set up. Fleeting Expertise, Streamline, and Primed Continuity will allow Sevagoth to have a decent energy drain in his Gloom ability. At max range, this ability will only drain 2.58 energy per second. With 225% power strength, Gloom will have a 78% slow percentage. But you can increase this to 84% slow by using the Pax Bolt method, which increases your power strength by 30%. Mind you, the increase to slow may not be significant in numbers, but in reality, you will see a big difference when it comes to survivability. 84% is like seeing an enemy move one muscle every minute, while doing a 94%, or even max 95% slow in Gloom would be better, as enemies will almost look like they are frozen and can't move. Now, the Pax Bolt trick is highly advisable if you are running infested missions, since you can easily trigger a headshot kill with these enemies. The same goes with Corpus factions. I am saying this to you since the build, which only have transient fortitude, is more of a conservative build for those who don't like insane energy drains. It's also a reliable build, especially against infested, because we all know how good this faction is in turning our energy to zero. Now, if you are facing against Grineer and Orokin, then you can go with the Blind Rage build if you want. This will allow you to have 94% Gloom slow, which is very significant for survivability and as well as defending targets and spots. Yes, this is one of the best feature of Sevagoth. He can both attack and defend at the same time. With a high slow percentage in your Gloom ability, you can just leave Sevagoth near a defensive target, and let your shadow do the killing. Gloom can even slow demolished units, but only for a couple of seconds. Then, the ability gets deactivated and you have to cast it again. But honestly, I don't prefer this ability over Magus Lockdown in terms of dealing with the demolished units in disruption missions. By the way, without the Umbral Former, you will still need at least 5 Former on this build. Probably, you will end up adding a couple of Dash and V polarities, since these are the polarities that goes with the most needed mods for Sevagoth. Take note that this build is not all about Gloom, but you can make good use of the semi-nuking capabilities of the Reap What You Sow combo. However, you should revert to the conservative build if you want to use this combo at will. In terms of his shadow, I just added 2 former in my build. All you need is a bunch of range mods for your Embrace to have a decent pull radius. and a bunch of power strength mods, so your Death's Harvest will have a decent vulnerability debuff percentage. The rest of the mods are for survivability, and in fact, adaptation won't be necessary, since with a high slow percentage in Gloom, you will have enough time to recuperate from the damages that you have taken from the enemies. Lastly, I did not put Steel Charge as the aura for the increase of damage of Sevagoth's Exalted Claws. Power Strength mods or Steel Charge owned in your Shadows build doesn't affect the Exalted Claws. Instead, how much Power Strength you put in Sevagoth does affect his Exalted Claws. Speaking about his claws, Vol Kitty wishes that Digital Extremes have handed these things on her. These things have massive critical chance and status chance that Sevagoth can murder everything in its path with just a few swipes. Its heavy attack is also madness, and it can possibly deal 500k to 800k bleed ticks on an enemy. But as you can see, I did not opt for a heavy attack build, since the wind up time for his Shadow's heavy attacks kind of takes too long. You can equip Killing Blow for more damage and faster wind up speed, but it's still lacking some with the help of Amalgam Organ Shatter. His Shadow's Claw can't equip Amalgam mods and as well as Acolyte mods, which is why I stick to this kind of mod setup. For those who don't have Prime Smite mods, then you can stick with the normal version, or you can go with Spoiled Strike if you can bear the slow attack speed. If not, then you can go with Gladiator Might for more critical damage. You can also do a Viral Heat combo Shadow Claw build, which will give you a 67% status chance. This is heavily favored against enemies that have high armor like Grineers and Orogin. However, you can always swap out to any element combo if you want, depending on what faction you are facing. While this is not very important, but it's a good thing to know that the Cleaving Claws combo has guaranteed /procs in its third and fourth hits. Its heavy attack also has guaranteed /procs, and I'm letting you know so that you can somehow abuse the bleed mechanics of these Exalted Claws. For those who are saying that Sevagoth is trash and just blatantly stating that his ability sucks, well, I highly suggest that you take a second look at the frame, as I think you have missed something important or overlook the fact that frames need a bit of tweaking in terms of their builds to make them powerful. I don't want to sound rude, but honestly, it's kind of hilarious seeing people say that it's trash when they see something that is not their preference. We get it that you want to stick with meta warframes, but saying something is trash without even testing everything about it is absurd. I'm just saying my 2 cents here, and I hope that you find the video informative. If I have missed a piece of information about Sevagoth in this video, then feel free to share it in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. Squad Leader signing off.
Evolution. This is the future.